One scene. That's all it took. In the mid-1950s, the most-watched show in America vanished from television almost overnight, and the official story never added up. Executives gave vague answers. Cast members went silent. And the audience that had made Ralph Cramden a household name was left with nothing but reruns and rumors. What really happened inside that studio? The answer involves ego, money, a secret deal, and a moment nobody was supposed to see. Before the scandal, there was the success. And it was unlike anything television had seen. When The Honeymooners premiered as a standalone series in October 1955, it didn't slowly build an audience. It captured one immediately. Tens of millions of Americans rearranged their Saturday nights around a half-hour show set inside a small, barely furnished Brooklyn apartment. No expensive sets. No elaborate production design. Just 4 characters, raw performances, and an energy that felt genuinely alive. Jackie Gleason was the center of all of it. But he wasn't just the star, he was the authority. Every creative decision flowed through him. CBS executives learned quickly that their role was to distribute the show, not to direct it. Gleason had negotiated a contract that gave him ownership of the content and control over the footage. What aired was his decision. What didn't air was also his decision. For a network accustomed to holding total power over its talent, this arrangement was uncomfortable. They accepted it because the ratings left them no choice. The show was performed live. No retakes. No safety net. What happened in that studio on Saturday night was what America saw, unfiltered and completely unguarded. That format created a specific kind of tension in every episode, a feeling that anything could go wrong at any moment. Audiences felt it. That feeling kept them watching. Millions tuned in every week without any idea what was really happening behind those studio walls. The version of the show they saw was polished on the surface. Underneath, the structure was more fragile than anyone publicly acknowledged. A phenomenon built on one man's absolute authority is only as stable as that man's judgment. And judgment under pressure does not always hold. Every live broadcast carries risk. Lines get dropped. Props fail. Timing breaks down. These moments happen, and in live television, they happen in front of everyone. Usually they pass. They get absorbed into the noise of production and forgotten by the following week. But during one particular episode in the 1955 to 1956 season, something happened on that stage that did not get absorbed. It did not pass. It landed hard, and the people who saw it did not move on. The precise nature of what occurred has never been confirmed in a single authoritative account. What different sources agree on is limited but consistent. Something in that broadcast crossed a line, either in the behavior visible between cast members or in content that pushed against a broadcast standard CBS had been quietly pressing Gleason to respect. It aired live. Millions of people watched it in real time. And the response that followed was not ordinary. CBS received complaints at a volume that moved quickly up the chain. Advertisers grew uncomfortable. In 1950s television, advertiser discomfort was not an abstract concern. Sponsors were deeply embedded in productions, and their anxiety translated directly into financial pressure on the network. CBS needed a response from Gleason. What they received instead was a wall. He did not apologize. He defended the broadcast, defended his cast, and refused to acknowledge that anything had gone wrong. That refusal was completely consistent with who he was, a man who had built everything on instinct and had never backed down from a position he believed in. But it transformed the situation. What might have been managed as an isolated incident became a direct confrontation between the network and its most powerful talent. CBS could no longer stay passive, and Gleason showed no sign of moving. Two sides were now facing each other across a line that had not existed before that broadcast. One held institutional authority and advertiser relationships. The other held legal ownership of the content and the loyalty of 30 million viewers. Something was going to break. The only question was which side would feel it first. What followed the confrontation was not dramatic or public. There were no announcements, no walkouts, no statements to the press. What happened next took place in rooms that were closed to everyone except the people who needed to be there, lawyers, executives, and the man at the center of all of it. CBS wanted oversight. Specifically, they wanted a review process, some mechanism that would allow network representatives to examine content before it reached a live broadcast. For most talent relationships of that era, this would not have been a remarkable request. Networks reviewed content. That was standard. But Gleason's contract had been constructed to remove exactly that kind of oversight, and both parties had signed it. Now CBS was asking him to accept what he had specifically negotiated to prevent. He refused. The meetings went nowhere. Lawyers proposed language that the other side rejected. The actual incident that had started everything was almost never addressed directly, because doing so would have required one side to concede something they were not prepared to concede. So the conversation circled around structure, process, and the future of an arrangement that was visibly falling apart. What makes this negotiation significant is the financial reality beneath it. The Honeymooners was generating serious advertising revenue. Walking away from it was a real financial loss for CBS. And yet the network kept pushing. That decision, choosing control over profit, reveals how seriously they viewed the situation. This is the part of the story most accounts skip entirely. The business of television in this era, the real architecture of power behind the performances, tells you more about what happened than any version of the official narrative ever has. If that kind of history interests you, this channel goes exactly there, and there is more coming. Something was eventually signed. The specific terms were never made public. Both sides walked away with a version of events they could live with, and a silence they agreed to maintain. When the show ended, it left behind 39 episodes. Gleason packaged them, licensed them, and sent them into syndication as the complete record of what The Honeymooners was. The classic 39. That number became famous. Those episodes became the show in the public mind, and everything outside them effectively stopped existing as a cultural reality. But significant material existed beyond those 39 episodes. The Honeymooners characters had appeared for years inside the Jackie Gleason Show, the variety program that preceded the standalone series. Those sketches were numerous, widely watched, and directly connected to the same creative world. Gleason chose not to include them in the official legacy. He controlled the footage. That control was absolute and legal. What he preserved was what the public received. What he didn't preserve or chose not to make available simply disappeared from the accessible record. Television historians who examined this period noticed that the archival gaps were not random. The missing material aligned too precisely with the timeline of the controversy to be explained by ordinary deterioration. Kinescope recordings from that era were sometimes lost through neglect. But the pattern here suggested something more deliberate. Most people who grew up watching reruns of this show never suspected they were seeing a curated selection, not the full picture, but the picture Gleason had chosen to present. Some footage may have been destroyed. Some was almost certainly withheld. And some, according to archivists who have spoken carefully on the subject, may still exist in private collections that have never been opened to researchers. The archive has a shape to it. That shape is not natural. It was constructed by a man who understood, better than almost anyone, that controlling the record meant controlling the memory. The show did not fade after it left the air. It grew. The classic 39 entered syndication and became a permanent fixture of American television. Ralph Cramden appeared on screens across the country for decades. Gleason received recognition, awards, and the kind of cultural reverence that few entertainers ever reach. The legacy looked complete and unambiguous from the outside. But quietly, persistently, a different kind of scrutiny was developing. Journalists and television scholars began asking questions that the official account didn't cleanly answer. Why had one of the highest-rated shows in the country ended after a single standalone season? Why were production records from that specific period incomplete? Why did cast members, crew, and network staff give accounts that were consistent in what they omitted rather than in what they said? Some inconsistencies were minor. Some were harder to dismiss. A former CBS staff member, speaking in a recorded interview from the 1980s, referenced an agreement not to discuss specific production incidents. That phrase, offered almost in passing, pointed directly at the 1955 to 1956 season. It was the kind of language that only exists when there is something specific being protected. Gleason died in 1987. With him went the most direct path to a complete answer. The cast members who survived him spoke warmly about the show and carefully about everything else. The silence that had been maintained for 30 years continued without interruption. What remained was a pattern, contractual, archival, and testimonial, that pointed toward a deliberate effort to control how the story would be told. Not out of malice, but out of the deeply human desire to be remembered on one's own terms. Decades later, the full truth of what ended the Honeymooners remains out of reach. The official account, creative decisions, format changes, a mutual and professional conclusion, is not entirely false. But it is incomplete in ways that feel intentional. The gaps are too consistent. The silences are too deliberate. The pattern is too clear to be accidental. What is established is this. A broadcast during the 1955 to 1956 season generated a serious and abnormal response. A negotiation followed that was fundamentally about control, not creativity. The show ended. The footage was selectively preserved, and the people who were present maintained a coordinated silence for the rest of their lives. Television historians are careful in their conclusions, not because the evidence is thin, but because the gaps are large enough that certainty is impossible. What they agree on is that the story delivered to the public was shaped by people with strong incentives to shape it. The truth is not entirely gone. There may be recordings in private collections. There may be legal documents in sealed archives. There may be correspondence between Gleason and CBS that has never been reviewed outside a small circle. The material exists somewhere. It has not been lost. It has been kept. What ended this show was not fatigue, and it was not a mutual decision. It was a confrontation between a man who refused to be controlled and an institution that decided the cost of that refusal was finally too high. The scene that triggered it has never been fully identified. The negotiation that ended it has never been fully disclosed. And what happened to the performers connected to that season, the ones who quietly vanished from television in the years that followed, that thread has never been properly pulled.